My gold digger Emil called my engagement ring cheap, so I canceled the wedding on Facebook. The first time I met my girlfriend Annalyn's mother, she looked at my Honda Civic and said, "I thought you told me he was wealthy. That car's a piece of trash." I actually owned 3 cars, including a Tesla, but I'd driven the Honda for comfort on the 4-hour trip. I didn't correct her. Throughout dinner, JD kept making digs. "Well, looks aren't your strong point, so thank God you have money." Annalyn apologized afterward, mortified. Every visit, JD would mention how my money was the only reason Annalyn's with you. Once I snapped, I could burn every dollar tomorrow and she'd still love me. JD went quiet after that. For months, she was pleasant. I thought she'd finally accepted that I genuinely loved her daughter. Last month, I proposed to Annalyn in Switzerland. Sunset over the Alps, the exact ring she'd described wanting. A simple solitaire, classic, elegant. She cried, said yes. When we got home, Annalyn wanted to show her parents immediately. I dropped her off at JD's house. 2 hours later, my phone exploded. JD had posted on Facebook, "So disappointed in my future son-in-law. The ring he gave Annalyn is worth less than my purse. The diamond looks like a pebble from a parking lot. This cheap man has millions, but won't spend on my daughter. 3 years together, never bought her a car, never bought US a car, which real men do, and now this pathetic ring. If he doesn't buy a real ring immediately, there will be no wedding." She'd posted photos comparing Annalyn's ring to hers, with arrows pointing out how tiny mine was. The comments were brutal, calling me stingy, saying Annalyn deserved better. We hadn't even announced our engagement yet. I called Annalyn immediately. "Did you see what your mom posted?" "Yeah," she sighed. "I mean, she's not completely wrong. The ring is pretty small." My stomach dropped. "You said you wanted simple, classic, not flashy. That was kind of a test. I wanted to see if you'd go bigger anyway. Show you'd spoil me without being asked. Now I can't even brag to my friends. Sarah's ring is 3 carats. You're disappointed? Mom says you can afford a $100,000 ring easily. This one's what, 5,000? 8,000? And it's exactly what you described." I shouldn't have had to describe it. I hung up. The woman I loved was letting her mother turn her into someone I didn't recognize. Or maybe revealing who she'd always been. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. JD calling, Annalyn calling, texts from Annalyn's friends. JD's post had over 200 comments trashing me. So I made my own post. Regarding JD Henderson's comments, she's right. The ring was a mistake. The proposal was a mistake. The wedding is off. I wish Annalyn the best in finding someone who meets her mother's financial requirements. JD called 15 times before I answered. "Please, I didn't mean it. I was just emotional. You've insulted me since day one. It was always about money." Annalyn grabbed the phone, sobbing. "Please don't do this. I love you. The ring is perfect." Funny how it became perfect after I canceled the wedding. Mom got in my head. "Please. Your mother admitted the truth. You deserve someone who can give you the lifestyle you want. I deserve someone who loves me for more than my bank account." JD again. "She deserves that lifestyle. You can't take it away." "You're right. She deserves everything. But I deserve someone who'd love me even if I had nothing. Goodbye." I hung up and blocked them both. An hour later, my friend texted, "Check JD's Facebook." She posted a video, Annalyn in tears, showing the ring, saying it was actually beautiful. JD in the background. "Tell them about the prenup." My blood went cold. There was no prenup. I'd never mentioned one. Then Annalyn said, "He wanted me to sign away rights to his family's company, the one worth 50 million. I don't have a family company. I'm a software engineer with smart investments. 50 million? I have maybe 2 million. The next morning, pounding on my door, Annalyn stood there with 2 police officers. "He's inside," she called out. I opened the door. "Officers, what's going on?" "Mr. Acosta, we need to ask about your identity," the first officer said. Annalyn pushed forward. "Stop lying. JD hired a private investigator. We know everything." The second officer pulled out a photo. "Sir, can you explain why someone matching your description was reported dead in Seattle 15 years ago?" I stared at the photo. It was me, younger. But the name read, Alfie Kim. Death certificate dated 2009. "That's impossible. I'm Michael Acosta. I've always been Michael Acosta." Annalyn laughed bitterly. "Check his left shoulder. Alfie Kim had a birthmark there." The officers stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to come with us." "This is insane. I'm not Alfie Kim." But as I said it, I touched my left shoulder unconsciously. The birthmark I'd had removed 5 years ago. The one I told Annalyn was from a childhood accident. JD appeared from behind the police car with a folder. $50 million. That's what Alfie Kim inherited before he died. That's what you've been hiding. My mouth went dry. Fragments were coming back. A plane crash. A hospital in Seattle. A man in a suit saying, "Your only chance is to forget Alfie Kim ever existed." Annalyn stepped closer. "So who are you really? My fiancé Michael? Or the dead millionaire Alfie?" I looked at the officers, at JD's smug face, at Annalyn's tears. Then I saw him. Across the street. The man in the suit from 15 years ago, watching from a black car. He shook his head slowly and mouthed one word. "Run." I stare at Hudson across the street as he mouths, "Run." And every instinct screams at me to bolt, but my feet won't move. The police officers step closer, asking me to come downtown for questioning about the Alfie Kim death certificate. I realize running would make me look guilty of something I don't even understand yet. The first officer gestures toward the patrol car, his hand resting near his belt. Annalyn stands behind them, arms crossed, waiting for me to crack. JD watches from the sidewalk, that folder still clutched in her hands. I take a breath and nod. I'll go with them. I'll answer their questions. I pull out my phone and dial Scott before they can stop me. He picks up on the second ring and I tell him I need help immediately. He asks what's wrong, and I say the police are taking me in for questioning about something crazy. He says he'll be there as fast as he can. The officers lead me to their car, and Annalyn tries to follow, but they tell her she needs to wait at the station. She protests, saying she has a right to hear what I say, but they ignore her. JD climbs into her own car, probably already planning her next social media post. The drive downtown feels endless. I sit in the back, hands sweating, trying to make sense of Hudson's warning. Why would he tell me to run if I'm innocent? What does he know that I don't? The officers don't talk to me, just exchange quiet comments about traffic. We pull up to the station, and they walk me inside through a side entrance. The building smells like coffee and floor cleaner. They take me to a small room with a metal table and 4 chairs. One officer tells me to sit and wait. Drew Peterson walks in 15 minutes later carrying a folder and a cup of coffee. He's older than the other officers, maybe 50, with gray hair and tired eyes. He introduces himself as the lead detective and sits across from me. He asks basic questions about my background, where I'm from, how long I've lived in the city. His tone is curious, not angry. I answer everything honestly. I was born in Portland, moved here 6 years ago for work, been a software engineer for 8 years. He writes notes on a yellow pad. Scott arrives within 30 minutes, slightly out of breath, and a lawyer follows him in. The lawyer's name is Madison Wolfe, and she shakes my hand firmly before sitting beside me. She asks Drew what I'm being questioned about, and he shows her the death certificate photo. She examines it carefully, then looks at me. I provide my birth certificate from my wallet, my social security card, my employee ID from work. Drew spreads them across the table, comparing each document to the Alfie Kim death certificate. He admits they all appear legitimate. The Alfie Kim certificate shows someone who looks similar to me, but with different identifying details. Different social security number, different birth date by 3 months. Drew taps the photo with his pen. He says the resemblance is remarkable, but that's not a crime. Annalyn and JD wait in another room down the hall, and I can hear JD's voice rising as she demands the police arrest me for fraud. Her shouts echo through the thin walls. Drew excuses himself and walks out. I hear him telling them to calm down in the hallway. He explains that having a look-alike isn't illegal. JD insists they check my shoulder for the birthmark. Drew returns and asks if I'd be willing to show my shoulder. Madison nods that it's okay. I pull my shirt aside. The skin is smooth, unmarked. Drew makes a note. I explain the birthmark Annalyn mentioned was removed 5 years ago during a routine skin cancer screening, which I can prove with medical records from my dermatologist. Drew asks for the doctor's name and number. I give him my phone to find the contact. He steps out again to make a call. Madison leans close and whispers that I'm doing fine. Just keep answering truthfully. Scott sits in the corner, watching everything with worried eyes. Drew comes back 20 minutes later and says my dermatologist confirmed the procedure and the date. He closes his folder. After 3 hours of questioning, Drew says I'm free to go but asks me not to leave town while they investigate. He hands me his card and says to call if I remember anything unusual. Madison shakes his hand and thanks him for being professional. Scott drives me home in his truck, and I notice Hudson's black car is gone from across the street. The spot where he parked sits empty. I feel exhausted and confused about why JD would make up such a big lie about a $50 million inheritance. Scott walks me to my door and asks if I want him to stay. I tell him I'm okay, just need to sleep. He hugs me and says to call if I need anything. I lock the door behind me and collapse on my couch. That night, I can't sleep and start searching online for information about Alfie Kim and the 2009 plane crash. I type his name into Google and find news articles about a small private plane that went down near Seattle, killing 3 passengers. One victim was listed as Alfie Kim, age 23, heir to a tech company fortune. The article includes a grainy photo of Alfie Kim that makes my blood run cold because the resemblance is scary. We have the same face shape, similar build, even the same small scar above our left eyebrow. I touch my scar without thinking, remembering the childhood bike accident that caused it, but doubt creeps in. Did I really get this scar from a bike accident? The memory feels fuzzy around the edges. I click through more articles, reading about Kim Tech Solutions and the family's wealth. Alfie Kim was supposed to inherit everything after his father died. Bits of memories flash through my mind that don't quite fit my life story. A hospital room with beeping machines, a man in a suit telling me everything would be okay, the smell of jet fuel and burning metal. I shake my head, telling myself these are just false memories triggered by stress and JD's lies. My brain is playing tricks on me because of everything that happened today. The next morning, Scott comes over with coffee and breakfast from the diner down the street. He insists I eat something, setting a bag of food on my counter. He asks if I've ever had gaps in my memory or strange periods I can't explain. I think about it while chewing a bite of eggs. I tell him about a 6-month period 15 years ago when I was supposedly recovering from a serious car accident, but the details feel fuzzy. I remember being told about the accident, remember the hospital stay, but I can't actually picture the crash itself. Scott's face gets serious. He asks what I remember from before the accident. I describe my childhood in Portland, my parents, my school, but as I talk, I realize how vague it all sounds, like I'm describing a story someone told me instead of my own life. I dig through old boxes in my closet looking for papers from that time. Scott helps me pull down boxes from the top shelf. I find my medical records in a manila envelope and spread them across my bed. There's a discharge summary from a hospital in Portland, but no admission records or details about the actual accident. Just a single page saying I was released after treatment for injuries. Scott points out that's strange for someone who supposedly spent weeks recovering. Where are the x-rays, the doctor's notes, the insurance claims? I search through every box, but find nothing else. My hands start shaking as I realize my entire documented history is full of holes. I pull my phone out, and the screen lights up with notification after notification, dozens flooding in every second. Messages from numbers I don't recognize, friend requests from strangers, comments on posts I haven't even made. My hands shake as I scroll through them. JD posted something new on Facebook and it's spreading fast. The post shows the photo of Alfie Kim's death certificate next to a current picture of me, with arrows pointing out similarities. Her caption reads, "Exposed. Con artist Michael Acosta is actually dead millionaire Alfie Kim, who faked his death to steal inheritance. Police investigating now." The comments section explodes with anger from people I've never met. Someone writes that I should be locked up immediately. Another person calls me a disgusting fraud who deserves everything coming to me. A woman shares the post to 3 different groups, adding her own commentary about how people like me make her sick. I keep scrolling and find worse things. Strangers discussing where I live and work. Someone posting my address with a note saying, "This is where the fraud lives." My stomach turns as I realize hundreds of people now think they know the truth about me, and they're all convinced I'm a criminal. Scott walks over and puts his hand on my shoulder, asking if I'm okay. I can't even answer because another wave of messages hits my phone. Someone created a hashtag about me. People are sharing JD's post everywhere. A news blog picked it up already, running a headline about the mysterious case of the dead heir who came back to life. I look up from my phone and glance out the window, needing a break from the screen. That's when I see it. The black car is back, parked in the exact same spot across the street where it was yesterday. Hudson sits behind the wheel, watching my building. Scott notices me staring and asks what I'm looking at. I point toward the car without saying anything. Scott squints through the window and asks who that is. Before I can explain, Hudson opens his car door and steps out onto the sidewalk. He looks directly at my window, making eye contact with me even from this distance. Then he starts walking toward my building entrance. My heart pounds as I watch him cross the street. Scott asks again who that man is, his voice more urgent now. I tell him it's the guy from yesterday, the one who told me to run. Scott's eyes go wide and he asks if we should call the police. I shake my head because I don't know what to think anymore. The police already questioned me. JD already exposed everything online. What would calling them even accomplish? Heavy footsteps echo in the hallway outside my apartment, getting closer. Scott moves toward the door, positioning himself between it and me like he's ready to protect me if needed. 3 sharp knocks break the silence. I walk to the door on shaky legs and look through the peephole. Hudson stands there in a dark suit, holding a leather wallet in his hand. I open the door slowly. Hudson holds up the wallet and flips it open, showing me a federal badge and identification card. The badge looks real, with an official seal and his photo next to the name, Hudson Livingston. He introduces himself as a federal agent and says we need to talk about my safety. His voice stays calm and professional, nothing like the urgent warning from yesterday. He looks past me at Scott and says, "This conversation needs to be private." Scott immediately says, "No way. He's not leaving me alone with some stranger." Hudson's expression doesn't change as he explains, "This is a matter of federal security." Scott crosses his arms and plants his feet, making it clear he's not going anywhere. I put my hand on Scott's arm and tell him it's okay. Scott turns to me with concern written all over his face, asking if I'm sure about this. I nod, even though I'm not sure about anything anymore. Scott reluctantly agrees, but says he'll wait right outside in his car, and if I don't text him in 30 minutes, he's calling the police. He grabs his jacket and leaves, giving Hudson a warning look as he passes. Hudson walks into my apartment, and I close the door behind him. He sits down on my couch without asking, settling in like he plans to stay a while. I remain standing, too nervous to sit. Hudson leans forward with his hands clasped together and starts talking. He says that 15 years ago, Alfie Kim witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see. His family's company, Kim Tech Solutions, had executives running a major scheme to steal money from investors. Alfie stumbled onto evidence of the crime while going through company files after his father died. The people involved were dangerous, connected to organized crime networks that laundered money through the company. When Alfie threatened to go to the authorities, they tried to kill him. The plane crash wasn't an accident. Someone tampered with the aircraft before takeoff, intending to make sure Alfie Kim never testified. Hudson pauses and watches my face carefully. He says Alfie survived the crash but barely, spending weeks in a hospital under protective custody. The witness protection program stepped in and offered him the only way to stay alive. Forget Alfie Kim ever existed and become someone completely new. I listen to Hudson's words and feel pieces clicking into place in my mind, like a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. He continues explaining that the program gave Alfie Kim a complete identity transformation. They found a real person named Michael Acosta, who died as an infant decades ago, and used his identity as a foundation. They created a full background, complete with school records, medical history, even manufactured childhood memories that were planted through intensive psychological conditioning. The Michael Acosta identity came with legitimate documentation because it was built on a real person's paper trail. Every record, every piece of identification, every trace of Michael Acosta's existence was carefully constructed by federal experts to be completely bulletproof. Hudson says the program spent months working with Alfie Kim to help him accept and internalize his new identity. They used therapy, conditioning techniques, even medication, to help merge the new identity with his real memories. Hudson stands up and walks to my window, looking out at the street below. He turns back to me and says the birthmark on my shoulder wasn't real either. They added it artificially during the recovery process, a small distinguishing mark to help separate my new identity from Alfie Kim's appearance. Then 5 years ago, they removed it as an extra security measure when they worried someone might use it to connect the two identities. My car accident that I remember so vaguely, the one I supposedly spent months recovering from, that was actually the physical therapy and psychological conditioning period. The fuzzy memories make sense now, because I wasn't actually in a car accident. I was in a federal facility, learning to be Michael Acosta. The sparse medical records weren't a mistake or an oversight. They were intentional, designed to prevent anyone from digging too deep into my past and finding inconsistencies. Hudson explains all of this in a matter-of-fact tone, like he's describing a routine procedure instead of revealing that my entire existence is a lie. My legs feel weak, and I finally sit down in the chair across from Hudson. He confirms what I've been afraid to accept since yesterday. I am Alfie Kim. The $50 million inheritance is real, sitting in a trust that was frozen after my supposed death. I can't access it without revealing my protected identity and putting myself at risk. Hudson says JD's private investigator somehow pieced together enough information to connect Michael Acosta with Alfie Kim. Maybe he found an old photo. Maybe he noticed the physical similarities and dug deeper. Maybe he got lucky with a database search. However it happened, the truth is out now. My safety is compromised because the same dangerous people from 15 years ago might learn I'm still alive. Some of them are out of prison now. Some of them never got caught. And all of them would love to make sure Alfie Kim can't testify again or cause them any more problems. Hudson sits back down and his expression softens slightly. He says Annalyn and JD probably stumbled onto this information by accident when the investigator brought them his findings. Instead of being scared or concerned for my safety, they saw an opportunity. They likely planned to blackmail me into sharing the inheritance, rather than exposing my identity publicly. $50 million split even 2 or 3 ways is still life-changing money. They probably figured they could threaten to reveal the truth, unless I gave them what they wanted. But their social media posts changed everything. By posting about Alfie Kim publicly, by drawing attention to the connection between me and the dead heir, they made the situation exponentially worse. Now it's not just them who know. It's hundreds of strangers online, news blogs, anyone who sees JD's viral posts. The very people I've been hiding from for 15 years might see those posts and realize Alfie Kim survived. I ask Hudson why he told me to run yesterday if he's a federal agent supposed to protect me. He's quiet for a moment before answering. He admits the Witness Protection Program's standard policy is immediate relocation when a protected identity gets compromised. They would have moved me that same day, given me a third identity, made me disappear again. But Hudson says he's been watching me for 5 years, ever since the birthmark removal raised flags in their monitoring system. He's seen how I built a life as Michael Acosta, made real friends, created genuine relationships. He believes I deserve a choice about my future, instead of having it decided by program protocols. Running would mean abandoning everything I've built over the past 15 years. My job, my home, my friendships, every connection I've made as Michael Acosta would have to be left behind. Hudson wanted to give me the option to decide for myself whether the inheritance and the truth are worth the risk, or whether I'd rather run and start over completely fresh somewhere else. Hudson stands to leave and hands me a card with a phone number on it. He says to call him when I make my decision. But don't take too long, because the longer I wait, the more dangerous the situation becomes. He walks to the door and lets himself out without another word. I sit alone in my apartment, surrounded by the life I built as Michael Acosta, and try to process what I just learned. My childhood memories of growing up in Portland are manufactured, implanted by federal psychologists. The parents I remember never existed. The schools I attended, the friends I had as a kid, the experiences that shaped who I thought I was, all fiction. My family history is a carefully constructed story with no basis in reality. The person I believed myself to be for the past 15 years never really existed at all. Michael Acosta is a ghost, a shell, a convenient identity created to hide Alfie Kim. The only real part of my life is the past 15 years since the plane crash, and even those years were built on a foundation of lies. I don't know who I am anymore. I hear Scott's car door slam and his footsteps coming back up the stairs. He knocks twice before letting himself in with the spare key I gave him years ago. I'm still sitting on the couch, staring at the spot where Hudson stood just minutes ago. Scott drops into the chair across from me and waits. I tell him everything Hudson said, the whole insane story about Alfie Kim and the plane crash and the Witness Protection Program. Scott's face goes through about 5 different expressions while I talk. Disbelief first, then confusion, then something like concern. When I finish, he leans forward with his elbows on his knees and asks if I'm okay. I honestly don't know how to answer that question. My best friend of 10 years is looking at me like he's trying to figure out if I'm still the same person he thought he knew. I can see him processing it, trying to match the Michael Acosta he's known for a decade with this Alfie Kim person I apparently used to be. Scott surprises me by saying it doesn't matter. He says my name could be Alfie or Michael or anything else, and I'd still be the same guy who helped him move 3 times and showed up at the hospital when his dad had a heart attack. His loyalty hits me harder than I expected, and I feel my eyes getting wet. I realize that genuine relationships aren't built on manufactured identities or fake histories. They're built on actual shared experiences and the person you choose to be. I tell Scott about the inheritance, the $50 million sitting in a trust I can't touch without exposing myself. I tell him about the executives Alfie Kim helped convict, and the danger I might be in if they find out I'm alive. Scott nods slowly and pulls out his laptop without saying anything. We spend the rest of the afternoon searching for information about Alfie Kim's family company. I find articles about Kim Tech Solutions, a software development firm that was huge in the Pacific Northwest back in the early 2000s. The company hit the news 16 years ago when federal investigators uncovered a major embezzlement scandal. Several top executives had been stealing money from investors for years, hiding it through fake contracts and shell companies. The articles say Alfie Kim was set to testify in the criminal trial before his death in 2009. His testimony was supposed to be crucial because he had access to internal documents that proved the executives knew exactly what they were doing. I read one article that calls him a hero for coming forward, despite pressure from powerful people who wanted him to stay quiet. I keep digging and find the trial records from the criminal case. Alfie Kim's testimony helped convict 3 executives who embezzled over $80 million from investors. The sentences were harsh, 15 to 20 years each. I cross-reference the names with recent news and discover all 3 were released from prison about 2 years ago. One name jumps out at me. Wayne Buckner, former CFO of Kim Tech Solutions, who got the longest sentence because he was the ringleader. News articles from his release show he immediately started filing lawsuits trying to locate Alfie Kim's inheritance. Wayne's lawyers argued that the money should go to compensate the victims of the fraud, but the courts kept rejecting his claims because Alfie Kim was legally dead. Scott takes over the laptop and finds Wayne Buckner's social media profiles within minutes. The guy has been posting almost daily about finding Alfie Kim's hidden assets. His Facebook page is full of angry rants about how the inheritance rightfully belongs to the company's defrauded investors. He shares articles about offshore accounts and hidden trusts, speculating about where the money might be. Some of his posts have this unhinged quality that makes my stomach tight. He talks about Alfie Kim like he's personally responsible for ruining Wayne's life, even though Wayne was the one who stole millions of dollars. Scott scrolls through months of posts and points out that Wayne seems obsessed, posting at weird hours and responding aggressively to anyone who disagrees with him. The thought of this guy learning I'm alive makes me nervous in a way Hudson's warnings didn't quite manage. My phone rings, and I nearly jump out of my skin. The screen shows a number I don't recognize. I answer, and a woman introduces herself as Madison Wolf, an attorney who specializes in witness protection cases. She says Scott contacted her an hour ago, and she's reviewed the basic facts of my situation. She wants to meet immediately to discuss my legal options. Her voice is calm and professional, but I can hear an edge of urgency underneath. Scott and I grab our jackets and drive to her downtown office. The building is one of those older ones with character brick and tall windows. Madison greets us in the lobby herself instead of sending an assistant. She's maybe 40, wearing a sharp suit, and she shakes my hand with the kind of grip that makes me trust her a little bit. Madison leads us to a conference room with a view of the city and closes the door. She sits across from us and gets right to it. She explains that I'm in a unique legal situation because my identity as Michael Acosta is technically legitimate, even though it was created by the federal government. The documents are real, the social security number is valid, everything checks out on paper. However, accessing Alfie Kim's inheritance would require proving I'm the same person, which would completely destroy my protected status. She lays out papers showing the trust structure and explains that claiming the money would mean publicly acknowledging I'm Alfie Kim. That would put me back on the radar of everyone who wanted him dead 15 years ago. She looks me in the eye and asks if the money is worth the risk to my safety. I tell Madison everything about Annalyn and JD's scheme. How JD hired a private investigator, how they fabricated the story about the prenup and the family company, how they brought the police to my door. Madison takes notes, and her expression gets sharper as I talk. When I finish, she sits back and says their extortion attempt actually gives us leverage. If JD and Annalyn publicly claim I'm Alfie Kim, they're essentially admitting to attempted blackmail. She suggests we could negotiate a settlement where they drop all claims and sign agreements never to contact me again, in exchange for me not pressing federal charges. The way she says it makes it sound simple, but I can tell from her face that nothing about this situation is actually simple. Madison picks up her phone and calls JD's lawyer right there in front of us. She's professional but firm, explaining that she represents me and proposing a meeting to discuss resolution. I can't hear the other side of the conversation, but Madison's eyebrows go up a couple times. She mentions federal charges for extortion and witness intimidation in a tone that makes it clear she's not bluffing. After a few minutes of back and forth, she hangs up and tells us JD initially refused to meet, but changed her mind quickly when the word federal came up. We schedule a meeting for the following day at Madison's office. Scott asks if JD will actually show up or if she'll try to run, and Madison says running would only make things worse for her. People like JD think they're smarter than everyone else right up until they realize they're not. That evening, I'm back at my apartment trying to process everything when someone knocks on my door. I look through the peephole and see a man I don't recognize, maybe 50 years old, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. He looks nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I open the door with the chain still on and ask who he is. He says his name is Garrett McCoy, and he's the private investigator JD hired. My first instinct is to slam the door, but something about how anxious he looks makes me pause. He says he needs to warn me that JD's plan goes deeper than I know. I take the chain off and let him in. Garrett stands in my living room wringing his hands and tells me JD has been in contact with Wayne Buckner. She offered to help him locate Alfie Kim's assets in exchange for a percentage of whatever they recover. He pulls out his phone and shows me text messages between JD and Wayne, screenshots he took before he realized how dangerous this was getting. The messages show JD explicitly telling Wayne that I'm Alfie Kim and suggesting specific ways to force me to share the inheritance. I stare at the screenshots on his phone, feeling my chest get tight. The messages between JD and Wayne are right there in black and white, showing exactly how she planned to use me. Garrett keeps scrolling, showing me more evidence, and each new message makes me feel sicker. He pulls out a folder from his bag and hands it to me, saying he made copies of everything because he knew this was wrong. The folder is thick, full of printed emails and text messages, and even voice recordings. I flip through the pages while Garrett stands there looking uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. One email from JD to Wayne says she's been working on Annalyn for months, convincing her that I'm hiding money. Another message shows JD telling Wayne that if they play this right, they can force me to split the inheritance with them. I find texts between Annalyn and JD from 6 months ago, back when things were still good between us. Annalyn writes about how she needs to make sure I'm serious before she wastes more time. JD responds with advice about testing my commitment by asking for expensive things. The ring situation wasn't spontaneous at all. They planned it. Annalyn's message from 3 months before the proposal says she told me she wanted a simple ring specifically, so JD could complain about it later. The whole disappointment act was rehearsed. I keep reading and find messages about the fake prenup story. JD coached Annalyn on exactly what to say in that video, including the $50 million number. They knew it would make me look like a liar when I denied it. The goal was to destroy my credibility, so people would believe whatever story they told next. Scott sees my face and asks if I'm okay. I tell him I feel like an idiot for not seeing Annalyn's true nature. He sits down next to me and says, sociopaths are good at deception, that I shouldn't blame myself for trusting someone I loved. Garrett apologizes again and says he's willing to testify about JD's scheme if it helps my case. He explains that he's been a private investigator for 20 years, and he's never seen someone weaponize information like this. He thought he was just helping a concerned mother check out her daughter's boyfriend. By the time he realized what JD was really doing, she'd already taken his research and twisted it into something dangerous. I asked Garrett how JD even found out about Alfie Kim in the first place. He says it was almost accidental. JD hired him to do a standard background check, looking for hidden assets or secret families. He found some inconsistencies in my early documentation, things that didn't quite line up. When he dug deeper, he discovered the death certificate for Alfie Kim and noticed the physical similarities. He brought this information to JD thinking she'd want to protect her daughter from someone with a suspicious past. Instead, JD's eyes lit up when she heard about the inheritance. She pushed him to find more details, asking specifically about money and assets. Garrett shows me his investigation timeline. He started working for JD 4 months ago, right around the time she suddenly became pleasant to me. That wasn't acceptance. That was strategy. She needed to keep me around long enough to gather ammunition. The more Garrett learned about Alfie Kim's inheritance, the more obsessed JD became. She started meeting with Wayne Buckner 3 months ago, coordinating their approach. Wayne wanted the money for himself. JD wanted a cut for delivering me to him. Neither of them cared what happened to me in the process. Scott asks Garrett why he's helping us now. Garrett says he has kids of his own, and he can't sleep knowing he helped set up an extortion scheme. He's willing to lose JD as a client and risk his reputation if it means doing the right thing. I look at this man who's basically a stranger and feel grateful that at least someone involved in this mess has a conscience. The next morning, Madison calls and says she's ready to meet with JD. Scott drives me to Madison's office downtown, and we arrive 15 minutes early. The office is on the 10th floor of a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows. Madison greets us in the lobby wearing a sharp gray suit, looking every bit the lawyer who doesn't mess around. She leads us to a conference room with a long table and tells us JD, Annalyn, and their lawyer should arrive any minute. I sit down and try to calm my nerves. Scott sits next to me, and Madison sits across from us, spreading out Garrett's files across the table. She's organized everything with tabs and highlights, making it easy to find the most damaging evidence. At exactly 10 o'clock, JD walks in with Annalyn and a man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit. JD looks smug, like she's already won. Annalyn won't make eye contact with me. Their lawyer introduces himself and sits down, pulling out his own folder. Madison doesn't waste time with small talk. She slides copies of Garrett's evidence across the table to their lawyer. He starts reading, and I watch his face change from confident to concerned to pale. He flips through the pages faster, his eyes getting wider with each message. JD tries to look over his shoulder, but he holds up a hand to stop her. After 5 minutes of reading, their lawyer sets down the papers and looks at JD with barely controlled anger. He asks if these messages are real. JD says she doesn't know what he's talking about. Madison pulls out her phone and plays one of the voice recordings Garrett provided. It's JD talking to Wayne, explicitly discussing how to blackmail me. JD's voice on the recording is cold and calculated, nothing like the emotional mother act she put on for the police. Their lawyer's jaw gets tight, and he asks for a moment alone with his clients. Madison says they can use the office next door. The three of them leave, and I can hear muffled arguing through the wall. JD's voice gets loud at one point, and her lawyer tells her to be quiet. They come back 10 minutes later, and JD looks less smug now. Her lawyer sits down and says they're prepared to discuss settlement terms. Annalyn tries to claim she didn't know about her mother's plan. Madison opens another folder and shows text messages, where Annalyn explicitly discusses blackmail strategies with JD. The messages are from Annalyn's phone, pulled from phone company records that Garrett obtained. Annalyn's mask slips, and she snaps that I should have just given them the money they deserved for putting up with my ugly face for 3 years. The words hit me, but I don't react. JD tells Annalyn to shut up, but the damage is done. Their lawyer closes his eyes like he wants to disappear. Madison leans forward and offers a final settlement. JD and Annalyn sign agreements saying they'll never discuss my identity publicly, drop all claims to any inheritance, and stay away from me permanently. In exchange, I won't press criminal charges for extortion. Their lawyer reads through the settlement agreement Madison prepared and tells JD she needs to accept this. He says the alternative is federal prison, and he's not kidding. JD tries to negotiate for some payment. She claims she deserves money for emotional distress, for having to deal with finding out her future son-in-law was living a lie. Madison shuts that down immediately, saying JD has no legal standing to claim anything. The evidence shows JD initiated this scheme for financial gain, not out of concern for Annalyn's well-being. For the next hour, JD and her lawyer go back and forth. She keeps trying to find angles, ways to get something out of this. Her lawyer keeps telling her to just sign. Annalyn sits there silent now, staring at the table. Finally, JD's lawyer says, if she doesn't sign, he's withdrawing from the case because he won't be part of criminal activity. That breaks JD. She grabs the pen and signs the agreement with angry, harsh strokes. Annalyn signs next without looking at me. I watch her signature on the page and feel nothing but relief that she's out of my life. Madison collects the signed documents and makes copies for everyone. JD and Annalyn leave without saying another word, their lawyer following behind them looking exhausted. After they're gone, Madison tells me we still need to address the bigger problem. Wayne Buckner knows my identity now, thanks to JD. Hudson has been watching Wayne's activities and reports that he's planning to travel to my city within the week. Madison suggests we need to be proactive instead of waiting for Wayne to make his move. She says Wayne is more dangerous than JD because he's desperate and has nothing to lose. I meet with Hudson again that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. He's wearing casual clothes this time, jeans and a button-down shirt, trying to blend in. He sits across from me and explains my options. The Witness Protection Program can relocate me, give me a completely new identity, start over somewhere else. But I'd have to abandon Michael Acosta entirely and become someone new for the third time. Everything I've built over the past 15 years would disappear. The alternative is to come out publicly as Alfie Kim, claim the inheritance, and deal with whatever comes next. Hudson says, if I go public, I'd have resources to protect myself. The $50 million inheritance could pay for security, lawyers, whatever I need. But it would also make me a target for Wayne and anyone else who thinks they deserve that money. Neither option feels good. I'd be running away again or painting a target on my back. Scott argues that I shouldn't have to keep running. He says I've been hiding for 15 years because of crimes other people committed. Wayne and those executives stole money and tried to kill me. Why should I have to spend my whole life looking over my shoulder because of what they did? He thinks I should reclaim my identity as Alfie Kim, get the inheritance I'm legally entitled to, and use those resources to protect myself. Madison agrees this approach could work, but warns it will be complicated and potentially dangerous. Wayne will fight the inheritance claim. Other people might come forward saying they deserve the money. The media attention will be intense. I'd be giving up any chance at a normal, quiet life. But she also says, living in fear isn't really living. I have a right to my own identity and my own inheritance. I spent the next 2 days alone in my apartment, turning everything over in my mind. Hudson's offer to relocate me kept echoing through my thoughts, the promise of a fresh start somewhere new with a third identity. But I was tired of running. Michael Acosta had been a lie, a manufactured person created to keep Alfie Kim alive. I'd spent 15 years pretending to be someone who never existed, building relationships on a foundation of false memories and government paperwork. Every friendship, every job, every moment of my life had been built on a story the Witness Protection Program wrote for me. JD and Annalyn had exposed the truth in the worst possible way, but maybe they'd done me a favor. I couldn't keep living as a ghost. Wayne was coming for the inheritance whether I hid or not, and running would just mean letting him take what was legally mine. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The $50 million wasn't about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my actual identity, the person I'd been before the plane crash tried to kill me. I called Madison that evening and told her I wanted to move forward. She asked if I was certain, reminding me that going public would make me a target for anyone who thought they deserved Alfie Kim's money. I told her I was done hiding. She said she'd start preparing the paperwork immediately. Madison filed with the probate court 3 days later. The petition was thick, over 40 pages of legal arguments and supporting documentation. She'd gathered DNA samples that proved my biological connection to the Kim family, dental records that matched Alfie Kim's from before the crash, and a detailed affidavit from Hudson explaining the Witness Protection Program's involvement. The filing requested the court officially declare me as Alfie Kim and grant me full access to the trust that had been frozen since 2009. Madison warned me the process would take weeks, possibly months, but the court scheduled an initial hearing for 3 weeks out. She seemed surprised by the quick timeline, saying the judge must have found the case particularly interesting. I spent those 3 weeks preparing my testimony, working with Madison to organize my fragmented memories of being Alfie Kim. Some memories came back easily, like my childhood home in Seattle and my parents' faces. Others remained fuzzy, buried under the false memories the program had implanted. Hudson met with us twice, providing documentation about the plane crash and the threats that had made witness protection necessary. He explained that the executives who'd embezzled from Kim Tech had connections to organized crime, people who'd wanted Alfie Kim dead to prevent his testimony. The news leaked before the hearing date arrived. I woke up one morning to find 3 reporters camped outside my apartment building, cameras ready and questions prepared. More showed up throughout the day, turning the sidewalk into a circus. My phone started ringing with calls from news outlets wanting interviews, journalists asking for exclusive stories about the dead heir who'd come back to life. The story was bizarre enough to capture public attention. A wealthy young man who'd supposedly died in a plane crash 15 years ago, suddenly reappearing to claim a $50 million inheritance. Social media exploded with theories and speculation. Some people thought I was a con artist. Others believed I was the victim of a complicated conspiracy. JD's Facebook posts from weeks earlier resurfaced, with people analyzing her claims about the prenup and the hidden company. Annalyn's video where she'd cried about the ring got shared thousands of times, with commenters debating whether she'd known the truth about my identity. Scott helped me navigate the chaos, screening calls and dealing with reporters who tried to push their way into the building. Hudson arranged for security, 2 professionals who kept the aggressive journalists at bay and made sure I could leave my apartment safely. The attention was overwhelming and invasive, but Madison said it might actually help our case by generating public sympathy. Wayne filed his counterclaim 2 weeks after my initial petition. His lawyer argued that Alfie Kim's inheritance came directly from Kim Tech, the company his family had owned before the embezzlement scandal destroyed it. Since the money originated from a fraudulent enterprise, Wayne's filing claimed it should be used to compensate the investors who'd lost everything when the executives stole from the company. The argument was clever, positioning Wayne as an advocate for victims, rather than someone trying to steal the inheritance for himself. His lawyer submitted statements from several former investors who supported the claim, people who'd lost their retirement savings when Kim Tech collapsed. Madison called me immediately after receiving the counterclaim, her voice tight with frustration. She'd expected Wayne to challenge my identity, not to attack the inheritance itself. The legal battle had suddenly become more complicated than a simple identity verification. We'd have to prove not only that I was Alfie Kim, but also that I had a legal right to money that came from a company destroyed by fraud. Madison said we needed to dig into Wayne's background, find evidence that his concern for victims was fake, and that he wanted the money for himself. I gave one interview to a journalist from a respected national newspaper. Madison had vetted multiple outlets before choosing this one, looking for someone who'd tell the story accurately without sensationalizing the details. The reporter met me at Madison's office, a woman in her 40s who'd covered corporate crime for over a decade. She asked careful questions, giving me space to explain everything in my own words. I described the plane crash, the moment I'd woken up in a hospital room with Hudson standing over me, telling me Alfie Kim had to die. I talked about the witness protection program, the manufactured memories they'd given me, the 15 years I'd spent as Michael Acosta, believing that was my real identity. I explained how JD's investigation had shattered the lie, forcing me to confront who I actually was. The reporter asked about the inheritance, and I told her honestly that the money mattered less than reclaiming my actual identity. I'd lived as a ghost for 15 years, and I was tired of pretending to be someone who never existed. The article came out 3 days later, a long feature piece with the headline, "The Man Who Died Twice." It was fair and sympathetic, presenting me as someone who'd survived an assassination attempt and spent years in hiding through no fault of my own. The public response was mostly positive, with people commenting that I deserved both safety and access to my own inheritance. Some skeptics still claimed I was running a con, but the majority seemed to support my case. Wayne responded with his own media campaign within days. He gave interviews to multiple outlets, carefully crafting his image as a reformed criminal seeking justice for fraud victims. He talked about his time in prison, claiming he'd spent years reflecting on his mistakes and wanting to make amends. His story portrayed him as someone who'd been caught up in the embezzlement scheme, but had genuinely changed, and now he wanted to use Alfie Kim's inheritance to compensate the people who'd been hurt by the fraud. The narrative was compelling, painting me as a wealthy heir trying to keep money that rightfully belonged to victims. Wayne gave emotional interviews where he talked about investors who'd lost their homes, retirees who'd seen their savings disappear, families destroyed by the financial collapse of Kim Tech. He conveniently left out his own role in the embezzlement, the fact that he'd been one of the executives who'd actually stolen the money. Madison worked with a private investigator to examine Wayne's financial records, looking for evidence that would expose his real motivations. They discovered he'd been living well beyond his means since getting out of prison, renting expensive apartments and driving luxury cars, despite having no legitimate source of income. Bank records showed suspicious deposits that suggested he was still involved in financial crimes. Madison compiled everything into a detailed report, proving Wayne wanted the inheritance for himself, not for any victims. The probate hearing arrived on a cold morning in early November. Madison, Scott, and I walked into the courthouse together, pushing through a crowd of reporters and cameras. The courtroom was formal and intimidating, with dark wood paneling and a high ceiling that made every sound echo. The judge was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Wayne sat across the aisle with his lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit who looked confident and prepared. The hearing started with Madison presenting our evidence. She walked the judge through the DNA results, the dental records, Hudson's affidavit about the witness protection program, and my own testimony about my fragmented memories. I took the stand and described everything I could remember about being Alfie Kim, the house in Seattle where I'd grown up, my parents' faces, the terror of the plane crash and waking up in a hospital bed. I talked about the 15 years as Michael Acosta, the confusion when JD's investigation exposed the truth, the struggle to integrate 2 identities that felt equally real and fake. Wayne's lawyer cross-examined me aggressively, trying to poke holes in my story and suggest I was making everything up to steal money. He asked why I couldn't remember certain details, why some memories were clear while others remained fuzzy. I stayed calm and explained that the witness protection program had deliberately created gaps and false memories to make my new identity more believable. Madison objected multiple times when the questions became too hostile, and the judge sustained most of her objections. Hudson testified next, his federal credentials lending weight to everything he said. He explained the Witness Protection Program's protocols, the reasons they'd given Alfie Kim a new identity, and the ongoing threats that had made the program necessary. He confirmed definitively that I was Alfie Kim, that every piece of evidence supported my identity claim. Wayne's lawyer tried to discredit Hudson, suggesting the Witness Protection Program had made mistakes, or that Hudson was lying to protect a failed operation. Hudson remained professional and unshakable, calmly refuting every accusation with documented facts. Phyllis Hunter, the federal prosecutor who'd originally handled my case 16 years ago, took the stand after Hudson. She was older now, her hair completely gray, but she remembered the Kim Tech case clearly. She testified about the embezzlement scheme, the threats against Alfie Kim's life, and her recommendation that he enter witness protection. She described the plane crash as a deliberate assassination attempt, not an accident, and explained why the program had been essential for my survival. Her testimony was powerful and convincing, backed by court records and investigative files from the original case. The judge listened carefully, taking notes and asking occasional questions. Wayne's lawyer tried to shift focus away from my identity to the question of whether I deserved the inheritance, but the judge shut that down and said they'd address the money issue after establishing my identity. Wayne took the stand in the afternoon, and his testimony fell apart almost immediately under Madison's cross-examination. She started with simple questions about his role at Kim Tech, getting him to admit he'd been a senior executive with access to company finances. Then she walked him through the embezzlement scheme, forcing him to acknowledge that he'd personally profited from the fraud. Wayne tried to claim he'd been a minor player who'd gotten caught up in something bigger, but Madison produced emails and financial records proving he'd been one of the primary architects of the scheme. She showed evidence of the money he'd stolen, the offshore accounts he'd used to hide it, and the lies he'd told to cover his tracks. Wayne's face turned red as Madison systematically destroyed his credibility. She asked about his current financial situation, and Wayne claimed he was living modestly on legitimate income. Madison presented the investigator's report, showing his expensive lifestyle and suspicious bank deposits. She asked if Wayne had any proof he'd actually helped fraud victims in the years since his release from prison. Wayne couldn't provide any evidence. Madison's final question was devastating, asking Wayne directly if he wanted Alfie Kim's inheritance to compensate victims or to enrich himself. Wayne stammered and avoided answering, and the judge ordered him to respond. He finally admitted he believed he deserved compensation for his prison time, revealing his true motivation. The judge took a brief recess before delivering her ruling. When she returned, she looked directly at me and said the evidence overwhelmingly proved I was Alfie Kim. She declared me legally Alfie Kim and granted me full access to the inheritance trust, effective immediately. However, she also ordered that a portion of the funds be set aside for legitimate victim compensation, money that would go to investors who'd lost everything in the Kim Tech fraud. The amount would be determined through a separate process, but she estimated it would be around $10 million. I nodded, agreeing with the decision, because those people had been hurt by crimes I hadn't committed, but had indirectly benefited from. Wayne's face went purple with rage as the judge dismissed his counterclaim entirely. She criticized his attempt to use fraud victims as a shield for his own greed and warned him that any further legal challenges would be viewed as harassment. Wayne stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over, and stormed out of the courtroom without saying a word. His lawyer gathered his papers quickly and followed. Madison squeezed my shoulder, relief evident on her face. Hudson approached me as people filed out of the courtroom, his expression serious despite the victory. He pulled me aside and said I needed to be careful, because Wayne might try something desperate now that he'd lost everything. I spent the next 2 days in a weird fog, waiting for something to happen. Hudson's warning kept playing in my head, making me jumpy every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. Scott stayed over the first night, sleeping on my couch with a baseball bat next to him, like that would actually help against someone desperate enough to break into a building. The second night I was alone, staring at my phone at 2 in the morning when I heard shouting outside. I jumped up and looked out the window to see Wayne being wrestled to the ground by 2 security guards Hudson had stationed around the building. Wayne was screaming something about his money, his rights, how I stole everything from him. One of the guards had him in an arm lock while the other called the police. Wayne's face was red and twisted with rage, spit flying from his mouth as he yelled. I watched from 6 floors up as police cars pulled up with their lights flashing. Drew showed up, probably because he'd been following Wayne's movements since the court hearing. Wayne tried to fight when they put handcuffs on him, kicking at one officer before they got his legs under control. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes from start to finish. Drew looked up at my window afterward and gave me a small nod before they loaded Wayne into the back of a police car. I texted Hudson to thank him for the security. He responded immediately, even though it was past 2 in the morning, saying Wayne had been watching my building for hours before attempting entry. Madison called me the next morning to tell me Wayne was charged with criminal trespassing, attempted breaking and entering and violating the restraining order she'd filed right after the court ruling. She sounded satisfied, maybe even a little smug. The judge wasn't going to be lenient this time because Wayne had shown he couldn't control himself. Madison estimated he'd get at least 3 years, maybe 5 if the prosecutor pushed for it. I felt relief wash over me, this physical sensation like someone had lifted a heavy weight off my shoulders. Wayne couldn't hurt me from prison. The inheritance was mine, legally and completely. JD and Annalyn were bound by NDAs they'd be stupid to violate. For the first time in months, I could actually breathe without feeling like something terrible was about to happen. Madison suggested I start seeing a therapist to process everything, and I knew she was right. Scott had been saying the same thing for weeks. I found someone who specialized in identity issues and trauma, a woman with good reviews who'd worked with other people in complicated situations. Her office was in a quiet building downtown, plants everywhere and soft lighting that felt calming. She introduced herself and asked me to tell her why I was there. I started talking and couldn't stop for almost the full hour. I told her about being Alfie, becoming Michael, the engagement disaster, the court battle, all of it spilling out in this messy stream. She listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally but mostly just paying attention in a way that made me feel heard. At the end, she said something that stuck with me. She told me I didn't have to choose between Alfie and Michael, because they were both parts of who I was. The trauma of the plane crash and witness protection created Michael, but Alfie's experiences and memories were still there underneath. Integration was possible, she said. I could honor both identities instead of trying to kill one off to save the other. I scheduled weekly appointments and left feeling lighter than I had in months. The work was going to be hard, she warned me, but it would be worth it. Scott threw a small party at his place the following weekend to celebrate the court victory and Wayne's arrest. Just a few close friends who'd supported me through everything. People who knew the whole story and didn't judge me for it. Someone brought a cake that said, "Welcome back, Alfie," with Michael written underneath in smaller letters. Everyone laughed, and Scott made a toast about my resurrection from the dead. They asked what I was going to do with the inheritance, whether I'd buy a mansion or a yacht or something ridiculous. I told them about the foundation idea I'd been thinking about for weeks. I wanted to help other people who'd gone through witness protection, people struggling with the same identity issues and lack of support I'd experienced. Most of the money would go toward that, I explained. Financial assistance for people trying to rebuild their lives, legal support for complicated situations, counseling services for the psychological damage that comes with forced identity changes. My friends got quiet for a moment. Then someone said it was the most Michael thing I could possibly do with Alfie's money. Scott looked proud, which made me feel good. We spent the rest of the night playing games and laughing, normal friend stuff that felt precious after months of legal drama and emotional chaos. I went home that night feeling connected to people in a way I hadn't since before Annalyn. Madison helped me set up the foundation over the next few weeks, handling all the legal paperwork and organizational structure. She agreed to serve on the board of directors along with Scott and a few other people with relevant experience. We met regularly to plan out the foundation's focus areas and how we'd provide services. Financial assistance for education, job training, housing deposits, things that would give people actual stability. Legal support for name changes, identity verification issues, custody battles complicated by protected status. Counseling services through a network of therapists who understood trauma and identity integration. The work felt meaningful in a way my software engineering never had. I was taking something painful from my own experience and using it to help others avoid the same struggles. Madison said the foundation could help hundreds of people over the years if we did it right. We hired a small staff, set up an office, created application processes for people seeking help. Every decision felt important, like we were building something that would outlast both of us. I spent hours reviewing applications from people whose stories broke my heart. Single mothers who'd lost custody because they couldn't prove their new identity was real. Young adults aging out of protection with no family support or resources. People suffering from depression and anxiety because they'd lost everyone they loved to maintain their safety. We started approving grants and seeing the immediate impact. One woman sent us a thank you card saying our housing assistance saved her from homelessness. A man wrote that our legal support helped him reconnect with his kids after 5 years of separation. The foundation became the center of my life in the best possible way. I started reaching out to distant Kim family members I hadn't seen in 15 years. My aunt was the first person I contacted, sending her a careful email explaining I was alive and wanted to reconnect if she was willing. She called me within an hour, crying so hard I could barely understand her. She'd mourned Alfie for 15 years, attended a memorial service, visited what she thought was my grave. Now I was back, and she couldn't believe it. We met for coffee, and she brought photo albums from my childhood, pictures I barely remembered. She told me stories about my parents, my grandmother, family vacations and holidays that triggered fragments of real memory buried under the manufactured ones. I remembered my mother's laugh, the way my father used to make terrible jokes at dinner, the smell of my grandmother's kitchen. These weren't implanted memories from the witness protection program. They were real pieces of Alfie that had survived 15 years of being Michael. My aunt cried again when I told her about the foundation. She said my mother would be proud of what I was doing with the inheritance. Other family members were equally welcoming when I reached out. Some were shocked, others suspicious at first, but most understood why I'd had to disappear. A cousin invited me to a family reunion happening in 2 months. The idea of being surrounded by Kims again felt both terrifying and necessary for my healing. The process of integrating my two identities took months of therapy and hard emotional work. My therapist helped me understand that Michael wasn't a lie. He was a survival mechanism that became real through years of living. Alfie wasn't dead. He was dormant, waiting for it to be safe enough to exist again. I could be both. I could honor the experiences and relationships I'd built as Michael, while reclaiming the history and family connections that belonged to Alfie. We worked through the anger I felt at having my identity stolen, the grief for the life Alfie lost, the fear that I'd never feel whole again. Some sessions left me exhausted and raw. Others gave me clarity I'd never had before. 6 months into therapy, I made the decision to legally change my name to Michael Alfie Kim. My therapist said this represented healthy acceptance of my complete identity, rather than rejecting either half. The paperwork took weeks, but when the judge approved the name change, I felt something click into place inside me. I wasn't choosing between two people anymore. I was becoming one complete person who'd survived something traumatic and come out stronger. My therapist smiled when I told her about the name change and said I'd done the hard work of integration that many people never achieve. Hudson checked in periodically over the following months, usually just a text asking how I was doing. He'd become something like a distant friend, someone who understood my situation in a way most people couldn't. One afternoon he stopped by my apartment, and we sat on my balcony drinking coffee. He told me the people who originally threatened Alfie were either dead or in prison. The corporate criminals from Kim Tech had mostly died of old age or health problems. The few still alive were too old and sick to be threats. Wayne's arrest had closed the last real danger to my safety. Hudson said the witness protection program officially considered my case closed successfully. I was free to live as Michael Alfie Kim without looking over my shoulder anymore. We talked for over an hour about everything that had happened. Hudson admitted he'd struggled with the decision to give me a choice about my future instead of forcing relocation. Program policy said compromised witnesses had to disappear immediately. But watching me build a real life as Michael over 5 years made him question whether that policy was always right. He'd bent the rules and could have lost his job. I thanked him for trusting me enough to make my own decision. We parted on good terms, shaking hands like equals instead of agent and protected witness. He told me to call if I ever needed anything, and I believed he meant it. Scott and I took a trip to Seattle 6 months after the court ruling. We drove up on a Friday morning, the city skyline appearing through the fog as we crossed the bridge. I'd avoided Seattle for 15 years because being there felt dangerous, like I might accidentally trigger memories that would break Michael's carefully constructed identity. Now I needed to face it. We found the plane crash memorial site in a small park near the airport. 3 bronze plaques with the names of the victims, including Alfie Kim. Fresh flowers sat at the base, even though the crash happened 15 years ago. Someone still remembered and cared. I stood there staring at my own name on the memorial plaque, this weird feeling of grief and acceptance washing over me. Alfie did die that day in a way. The person I'd been before the crash was gone forever. But Michael had lived and grown into someone stronger. The 2 identities were merging into one person who survived something traumatic and came out better for it. Scott stood next to me quietly, giving me space to process. I cried for the first time since the court hearing, really cried, letting out years of confusion and pain. When I finished, Scott hugged me and said we should get lunch. We spent the rest of the weekend exploring Seattle, visiting places I remembered from Alfie's childhood. My old neighborhood looked different, but familiar. The school I attended had been renovated. The park where I used to play basketball had new equipment. I felt like a ghost walking through my own past, but it didn't hurt the way I expected. It felt like closing a chapter properly instead of leaving it open and bleeding. I sold my software engineering consulting business 6 months after the court ruling. A competitor had been trying to buy me out for years, and I finally accepted their offer. The sale price was substantial, adding to the inheritance and giving me complete financial freedom to focus on the foundation full-time. My last day at the office felt bittersweet. I'd built that business from nothing as Michael Acosta, proving I could succeed without Alfie's money. Now I was walking away to do something more meaningful. The foundation had grown beyond my initial expectations. We'd helped over 50 people in the first year, providing grants for education, housing, legal services, counseling. Every week brought new applications from people desperate for support. I hired additional staff and expanded our services. The work was challenging, but rewarding in a way software engineering never was. I felt like I was living authentically for the first time in my life. My past no longer defined me, but it informed who I chose to be. The trauma and confusion had purpose now. I could take everything I'd learned and use it to help others navigate similar challenges. Some days were hard, reading applications from people whose situations reminded me of my own worst moments. Other days brought joy when someone sent a thank you note or called to say, our help changed their life. I was building something that would outlast me and help people long after I was gone. I started dating again 8 months after the court ruling, which terrified me after Annalyn's betrayal. My therapist reminded me that not everyone was a manipulative gold digger looking to exploit me. Real people existed who could love me for who I was, complicated history and all. I met someone through the foundation, a woman who worked with trauma survivors and understood the psychological impact of identity issues. Her name was Sarah, and she'd applied to be a counselor in our network. We talked after her interview about her experience working with people who'd survived abuse, trafficking, witness protection. She understood my journey in a way most people couldn't. I asked her to coffee a week later, being completely honest about my complicated history from the beginning. I told her about Alfie, Michael, the plane crash, witness protection, Annalyn's betrayal, everything. She listened without judgment and said everyone had complicated histories. She'd survived her own trauma and spent years in therapy learning to trust again. We started dating slowly, taking time to build trust and connection. She never asked about the inheritance or how much money I had. She cared about the foundation's work and the person I was becoming. Scott met her after a month and gave his approval, saying she seemed genuine and kind. My therapist said Sarah represented healthy relationship patterns, someone who respected my boundaries and supported my healing. For the first time since Annalyn, I felt hopeful about building something real with another person. 3 weeks after the settlement, I opened my laptop to check email and saw Madison had sent me an urgent message with a link to a tabloid website. The headline made my stomach drop. Dead heir's ex-fiancé speaks out. He manipulated me and stole my future. The article featured JD, sitting in her living room with a photo of Annalyn crying in the background. She claimed I'd tricked Annalyn into the relationship specifically to hide my secret identity, that I'd promised her daughter the world and then stolen it away. She said the inheritance rightfully belonged to Annalyn because she'd suffered through 3 years with that man and deserved compensation. The article included details about the NDA, which JD had clearly violated by giving this interview. I called Madison immediately, and she was already preparing the lawsuit paperwork. She said JD's lawyer would probably advise her to settle quickly, because violating an NDA this blatantly left no room for defense. The legal proceedings moved faster than I expected. JD's lawyer contacted Madison within 2 days, practically begging to negotiate a settlement before we filed in court. Madison pushed hard, demanding substantial damages for the breach of contract and the emotional distress JD's continued harassment caused. JD tried to argue she couldn't afford the amount we were asking, but Madison had done her homework and knew JD had recently inherited money from a relative. After a week of back-and-forth negotiations, JD agreed to pay me $200,000 in damages. I signed the settlement papers and immediately transferred the entire amount to the foundation. Using JD's malice to help people she'd never cared about felt like the right kind of justice. The letter from Annalyn arrived on a Tuesday morning, handwritten on expensive stationery that probably cost more than my first car. She wrote that she was sorry for everything that happened, that her mother had manipulated her into believing I was hiding money that should have been theirs. She claimed she didn't understand the full extent of JD's scheme until after the settlement, when her mother admitted she'd been planning the whole thing from the moment Annalyn introduced me. The letter went on for 3 pages, explaining how JD had coached her on what to say, how to act disappointed about the ring, how to play the victim. Annalyn said she really did love me at some point, before her mother poisoned everything with greed. She begged me to call her so we could talk about what happened. I read the letter twice, feeling nothing but exhaustion. I brought it to my therapy session that afternoon, and my therapist asked how I felt about Annalyn's apology. I said I didn't know if I believed it was genuine or just another manipulation attempt. My therapist helped me understand that it didn't actually matter whether Annalyn was sincere, because I didn't owe her forgiveness either way. She'd made choices that hurt me deeply, regardless of her mother's influence. Some relationships break in ways that can't be fixed, and trying to repair them just causes more damage. I put the letter in a drawer and never responded. Annalyn sent 2 more letters over the next month, each one more desperate than the last. I threw them away without reading them. My therapist said that was healthy boundary setting, protecting myself from someone who'd proven she couldn't be trusted. The foundation grew way beyond what I'd imagined when Madison and I first started planning it. By the end of the first year, we'd helped 53 people who'd left the witness protection program and were struggling to rebuild their lives. We provided education grants for people who wanted to finish degrees they'd started before entering protection. We covered housing deposits for those who couldn't afford first and last month's rent with their new identities. We paid for legal services when people needed help navigating the complicated process of reclaiming parts of their old lives. The stories people shared with me were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. A woman named Jennifer told me our housing grant literally saved her life because she'd been sleeping in her car for 2 months after leaving protection with nothing but a new name and a bus ticket. A man named Robert said our education grant let him finish his engineering degree, which led to a job that supported his family for the first time in 5 years. Every thank you note and phone call reminded me why this work mattered. These were real people who'd sacrificed everything to do the right thing, just like I had, and society had basically abandoned them once their testimony was no longer needed. The foundation gave them a chance to rebuild with dignity instead of just surviving. We hired 3 full-time staff members to handle applications and coordinate services. Madison remained on the board of directors, volunteering her legal expertise. Scott joined the board too, helping with fundraising and community outreach. The conference invitation came from an organization that specialized in trauma and identity issues. They wanted me to speak at their annual gathering about my experience with forced identity change and the psychological impact of living as someone else for 15 years. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people and sharing my story publicly made me want to throw up. I'd done one interview with a journalist, carefully controlled and edited. This would be live, unscripted, with mental health professionals and trauma survivors watching my every word. My therapist encouraged me to accept the invitation, saying it would be good for my healing process to own my story in such a public way. Scott said he'd come with me for moral support. Sarah offered to help me prepare my speech. I spent 3 weeks writing and rewriting what I wanted to say, trying to find the right balance between honesty and privacy. The day of the conference, I stood backstage with my notes shaking in my hands while the moderator introduced me to the audience. I walked out to polite applause and looked at the sea of faces staring back at me. For a moment, I couldn't remember a single word I'd planned to say. Then I saw Scott in the third row, giving me a thumbs up, and something settled in my chest. I started talking about the plane crash, the hospital, the man in the suit who gave me a choice between death and disappearance. I described what it felt like to wake up with manufactured memories, to look in the mirror and see a stranger's face with my eyes. I explained the constant fear of being discovered, the loneliness of having no real past to share with anyone. I talked about Annalyn and JD, about how my hidden identity made me vulnerable to people who saw me as a walking bank account. When I finished speaking, the room was completely silent for what felt like forever. Then someone started clapping and suddenly everyone was standing, applauding like I'd done something brave instead of just surviving. During the question period, several people shared their own experiences with identity trauma. A woman talked about being adopted and never knowing her birth family. A man described living in the closet for 30 years before coming out. Their stories weren't the same as mine, but the core experience of hiding your true self resonated across all our different circumstances. After the conference, at least a dozen people approached me privately to share more personal details about their identity struggles. Some of them cried. Some of them thanked me for making them feel less alone. I drove home that night feeling exhausted but lighter somehow, like I'd put down a weight I'd been carrying for too long. Wayne's trial took place 4 months after his arrest for breaking into my building. His lawyer argued for leniency, claiming Wayne had mental health issues and deserved treatment rather than prison. The prosecutor presented evidence of Wayne's long criminal history, including the original embezzlement conviction and several instances of fraud he'd committed after his release. The judge listened to both sides and then delivered a statement about Wayne's pattern of behavior. She noted that he'd had multiple opportunities to change his ways, but consistently chose to pursue money through illegal means. She said his attempt to extort me showed he hadn't learned anything from his previous prison sentence. The judge sentenced Wayne to 5 years in prison for attempted extortion, breaking and entering and violating the restraining order. Wayne's face went red, and he started yelling about how I'd stolen his money, how the inheritance should have gone to the fraud victims. The bailiff had to physically remove him from the courtroom while he screamed threats. I sat there watching him being dragged away and felt mostly relief. He couldn't threaten me anymore, couldn't show up at my home or try to force me to hand over money that was never his. Part of me hoped prison would finally motivate Wayne to get help and change his life, but I wasn't holding my breath. Some people are too committed to their own victimhood to ever take responsibility for their choices. A year after the court declared me legally alive as Alfie Kim, I was in a healthy relationship with someone who actually loved me for who I was. Sarah and I had been dating for 8 months, taking everything slowly, because I was still learning how to trust someone after Annalyn's betrayal. Sarah never asked about the inheritance money, or suggested ways I should spend it. She cared about the foundation's work, and the person I was becoming through all the chaos. We spent weekends hiking in the mountains, cooking dinner together, talking about our childhoods and our hopes for the future. She told me about her own trauma history, the abusive relationship she'd survived in her 20s, the years of therapy it took to feel safe with someone again. We understood each other's caution, the way we both needed to move carefully through the early stages of building something real. Scott met her for dinner one evening and gave his approval afterward. He said Sarah seemed genuine and kind, nothing like Annalyn's fake sweetness that hid manipulation underneath. My therapist said Sarah represented healthy relationship patterns, someone who respected my boundaries and supported my healing without trying to fix me or rush my process. I introduced Sarah to some of my Kim family members at a foundation fundraiser. My aunt pulled me aside later and said she liked Sarah's warmth and the way she looked at me like I mattered. For the first time since Annalyn, I felt hopeful about building a future with another person. The foundation's partnership with federal agencies developed gradually over the course of several months. Madison connected me with officials who oversaw witness protection program outcomes, and I started advocating for better mental health support during the transition process. I shared my own experience of being given a new identity with minimal psychological preparation for what that would mean long-term. The manufactured memories helped me blend in, but they also created a disconnect from my real self that took years to process. I argued that participants needed ongoing therapy, not just during the initial transition, but for years afterward, as they navigated the complexities of living as someone else. The agencies were surprisingly receptive to my suggestions. They invited me to consult on program improvements, using my unique perspective as both a survivor and an advocate. We developed new protocols for mental health screening and support. We created better transition assistance programs that didn't just dump people into new lives with a fake ID and a bus ticket. We established peer support networks so people leaving the program could connect with others who understood their experience. The work felt meaningful in a way my software engineering career never had. I was using everything I'd learned, all the pain and confusion and eventual healing, to make the system better for future participants. My advocacy helped shape policies that would protect people I'd never meet, preventing them from experiencing the isolation and identity crisis I'd struggled through alone. I bought a house in a quiet neighborhood with good security, but also the kind of warmth and character that made it feel like home. The previous owner had been an artist, and she'd painted murals on several walls that I decided to keep. The backyard had a garden that needed work, but had potential. The living room had big windows that let in afternoon sunlight. Sarah helped me pick out furniture and decorate the space, adding touches that reflected both our personalities. We hosted dinners for friends and foundation board members, filling the house with laughter and conversation. Scott came over most weekends, helping me fix up the garden and joking that I'd finally become a real adult, with a house and a girlfriend who wasn't a nightmare. The house represented something I'd never really had before, not as Alfie Kim in his family's mansion, or as Michael Acosta in his generic apartment. This was a space I'd chosen and built for myself, a place that felt safe and permanent. I installed a good security system because Hudson's warnings about staying careful still echoed in my mind, but I also made sure the house felt welcoming, rather than fortress-like. I wanted a home that reflected who I'd become, someone who'd survived trauma and come out the other side stronger, but not hardened. The first night I slept in the house, I lay awake feeling grateful for everything that had led me to this moment. The 15-year anniversary of the plane crash fell on a cold morning in October. I'd been planning the ceremony for weeks, wanting to mark the occasion in a meaningful way without being morbid about it. I invited Scott, Sarah, and a few Kim family members to gather at my house for a private memorial. My aunt brought photos of Alfie Kim as a child, images I'd never seen because they weren't part of my manufactured memories. Looking at them felt strange, like seeing a younger version of myself in someone else's life. I'd written a statement about survival, identity, and choosing your own path forward. Standing in my living room with the people who mattered most, I read what I'd prepared. I talked about how Alfie Kim died in that plane crash in a way, how the person he would have become never got the chance to exist. But I also talked about how Michael Acosta grew from those ashes, building a life that had real meaning and purpose. I said that Michael Alfie Kim represented the integration of both identities, acknowledging the past while embracing the present. I talked about how trauma can destroy you or transform you, and the difference often comes down to whether you have people who support you through the process. I thanked everyone there for being part of my healing, for accepting all the complicated pieces of who I was. My aunt cried and hugged me, saying her nephew had grown into a good man despite everything. Scott made a joke about me being the only person he knew who'd literally died and come back better. Sarah held my hand and told me she was proud of me. We spent the rest of the day sharing stories and memories, honoring what was lost while celebrating what was built in its place. My relationship with Sarah deepened over the following months, into the kind of partnership I'd always wanted, but never thought I'd find. We built trust slowly, learning each other's patterns and needs. She was patient with my occasional paranoia about being used for money. I was understanding when her past trauma made her pull back emotionally. We worked through conflicts by actually talking about them, instead of letting resentment build. She supported my foundation work, even when it meant I was stressed and distracted. I encouraged her career goals and celebrated her successes. 6 months after I bought the house, Sarah moved in with me. It felt right in a way nothing with Annalyn ever had. We were building something real together, based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than manipulation and greed. The foundation hosted a major fundraiser in the spring, bringing together donors and supporters to celebrate our first full year of operations. Sarah had been helping me plan the event for weeks, handling logistics and coordinating with vendors. Halfway through the evening, she pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the venue. She got down on one knee and pulled out a simple ring, asking me to marry her. I said yes, before she even finished the question. This time the engagement was real, built on actual love rather than schemes and lies. Scott saw what happened and started crying happy tears, saying he was proud of how far I'd come. My aunt hugged both of us and welcomed Sarah to the family. The rest of the evening turned into an impromptu celebration of our engagement. People I'd helped through the foundation came up to congratulate us, sharing how happy they were to see something good happening to someone who'd helped them so much. I looked around at all the genuine smiling faces and felt like I'd finally found the life Alfie Kim was meant to have, just by a different path than anyone could have predicted. The grant came through 6 months later, bigger than I expected. $2 million over 3 years to expand nationwide. I hired 5 new staff members, all of them people who'd been through witness protection themselves. They understood the struggle in ways no textbook could teach. We opened offices in 4 cities and started getting calls from people all over the country who needed help. The foundation became something real, something that mattered beyond just my own healing. Other organizations started reaching out, wanting to learn from our model. We presented at conferences and trained social workers on trauma-informed care for people rebuilding their identities. My story became a teaching tool, proof that you could survive something impossible and build a meaningful life afterward. 2 years after the judge ruled in my favor, I stood in my house looking at wedding photos on the wall. Sarah and I had gotten married in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. No drama, no schemes, just 2 people who loved each other building something real together. The foundation now helped over 300 people annually, providing grants, legal support, and counseling services. I'd integrated both parts of myself into someone stronger than either Alfie or Michael alone. My past didn't haunt me anymore, because I'd turned it into purpose. The inheritance that almost destroyed me became a tool for helping others navigate similar challenges. Sarah came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist, asking what I was thinking about. I told her I was grateful, for everything, even the painful parts that led me here. She kissed my cheek and said, "That's what growth looks like, finding meaning in the mess." I realized she was right. Sometimes the worst situations crack you open just enough to let something better grow through. That's how it went from my side. Now I want to hear your version. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading through later.